Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Visibility Factor podcast. This is Sue Barber, your host. I am beyond excited today to share with you my guest, Leah Marone, who has written an amazing book called Serial Fixer: Break Free from the Habit of Solving Other People's Problems. Wouldn't that be amazing if we don't have to solve everyone else's problems? We get to focus on ourselves for a change. So I read her book and I could see myself in so many places in there. And I know that you probably will as well. So welcome to the show, Leah. I'd love to have you share a little bit about your background and we'll get into some questions.
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for having me, Susan. I've been looking forward to this all week. I am a psychotherapist, a clinician by trade. And so I specialize in anxiety disorders. And I work with a lot of high performers, people with fierce inner critics, a lot of athletes, and also people with fierce inner pleasers that are in high compassionate roles and fields. And so that's kind of my clinical hat. I also do a lot of speaking and facilitation with workshops and kind of speeches based around boundaries, our internal boundaries that we need to set to maintain and execute the external ones we need to set, and a lot of grit and resilience training and self-awareness. My book, my baby, my current baby, has been out. And so I've been doing a lot of work with that. And yeah, I'm kind of all over the place, which keeps me going, but it's all under the umbrella of mental health.
Uh, Well, I'm so excited that you wrote this. Was it seeing patterns with clients or your own experience that you thought would help other people if you wrote this book?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above. I mean, I think, I would kind of categorize myself as a recovering serial fixer. I still have to work very hard at that. And, yes, I think it was from just, decades of seeing patients through my practice and then working with people in high empathy fields and CEOs to housewives to mothers to fathers to just all the roles. It was just collective across and kind of this unifying human thing that I found with people that have high levels of empathy and compassion. And
Hmm.
that, we've talked about burnout, we've talked about compassion fatigue the last few years, which rightfully so. But I feel like at this point, a lot of us can stand up and regurgitate like the symptoms of burnout and the things that we need to do to take care of ourselves. But it's really the activation and execution of these self care practices, and also redefining what self care actually is. It's sometimes messy, it's not glamorous, it's not post worthy generally. And I think that that's been misconstrued. And so, really trying to help people redefine what self care is. And a lot of that is that building that self trust and relationships. And it's amazing how much continuity I just started to see with, overextension and cyclical exhaustion and resentment when it came to just the roles we place ourselves in relationships and conversation. And that's a lot of the reason I wrote this book.
Well, so needed. I mean, I could see myself, of course, in it, but I could also see a lot of my client conversations as well, some things that they have brought up. So I chose some questions and some things from your book that I thought would really resonate with the audience because they are experiencing these things. I can see it and hear it in conversations I'm having. And I know that it's not easy, right? It's not easy to solve some of these things. And you first of all have to recognize it. So I love the self-awareness piece because it's not something I knew until I was working with a coach and shared with me some of this. So I think it's really important. So I'm just going to dive in if you're okay with what is the difference between fixing and helping? Because I think everyone thinks they're helping, but they may be fixing and they don't know the difference. So let's start with the basics.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful way to tee it up. I mean, I think the big difference there is the filter that you use. When we hear information, are we immediately jumping in to fix and solve? Are we problem solving and giving that advice too prematurely? Are we prematurely relating? A lot of times as humans, and it's not malicious by nature, but oftentimes, even in casual conversations, you'll ask someone a question like, "Oh, yeah, how was your vacation?" And they'll start talking about something. And immediately, because you're human, you make an association with something they shared or something they experienced. And then we sometimes flip the script and make it about us. So we
Mm.
may interrupt or we may just really quickly tag on, like, "Oh, I did that 3 years ago," or "My aunt experienced that," or "I did this." And you can see that that's not malicious, that's conversational sometimes. But oftentimes it really does flip that momentum. We're not creating enough space. And many of us think we are active listeners and good listeners, and not to say that we're not, But oftentimes we are jumping in conversations to fix and solve, use our
Mhm.
filters and our timelines. And the real big distinction between fixing and solving and supporting is really kind of that ownership, right? Are we keeping the ownership with its rightful owner, or are we grabbing it and making it ours? Because if you're okay and you can button it up and you're good to go, then I can get relief and we can move on.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see where that's definitely happened for me. I think is it because people are trying to share a part of themselves in that moment where they're in this conversation? Maybe if it's someone new that they're talking to and they're trying to build rapport, is that part of the reason they may do that?
Sure, absolutely. And again, it's not always a negative thing. Just to give you an example, too, I was meeting with a team the other day, and the leader was very, very proud of this initially, but he kind of shared that, when a team member comes to me and start to share one of their struggles, I immediately tell them how I struggled with that about 5 years ago, or when I started out. And that right there, yes, it's showing a little bit of vulnerability, but it was way too premature. And he would just
Hmm.
kind of have these lecture sessions where, so he'd have a little bit of information from something that someone was struggling with and immediately make it about himself. And so rather than approaching that, conversation from a coaching mentality and leading with curiosity and asking questions, even though he may have, know exactly what this team member should do, but refraining from that and keeping the ownership with that person, that right there is the difference between fixing and solving and
Hmm.
supporting. And you can see where that creates, not even professionally, but in our personal relationships, these kind of micro codependencies. And really, does not allow us, I think, to create space for others and get those repetitions in with, not overextending and empowering others.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. See, can you tell everybody this is going to be amazing? Okay. So I captured something that you wrote in one of your initial chapters that really struck me. Compassion flows outward, but is rarely allowed back in. Serial fixers are exceptional givers, yet often struggle with the vulnerability of receiving or letting others care for them. And I was meeting with someone the other day, and he talked about how it was so important to help everyone else, help his team, help his family, that everything he's ever done in his whole life was based, and he comes from outside the US, but his whole culture, I think, was based on a place of giving to others first. And then, whatever you have left is fine for you. And so I was trying to help him understand the importance of shifting that a bit for himself because he really has nothing left to give now because he's so
Mhm.
exhausted and has low energy and everything. I would love to just hear you share anything else about that and your experience of working with people.
Yeah, and that experience of the person you shared, I mean, it's such a common one, right? And I think it comes from such a good, pure place. And I think the goal is not to diminish our first step of leading with compassion and empathy. That's not the goal. It's not to start stiff arming people and live this
Yeah.
like self-centered life. But to your point, I think when we don't have, keep ourselves in the equation and give ourselves sometimes that same courtesy, even a little bit, we're prone to then burning out. We're prone
Hmm.
to then resentment. We're prone to lack of connection, even though we're giving so much and operating two steps ahead and are very baffled by why we still feel lonely and why our relationships are imbalanced. And so it's very hard, and many of us, I think, and I'm guilty of this as well, it was way easier to have my structure based on other people's needs and hurdles and struggles, right? And if I was occupied and even went out searching for those things, hence I'm a therapist by trade, you can see where there's a parallel here, that I could justify not doing maybe the work I needed to internally. It
Hmm.
kind of soothed that push of like, well, I'm serving all these other people. I'll get to me when I get to it. But a lot of it too was fear of like, I'm not going to be able to resolve that stuff within me, or it's going to be too
Hmm.
hard. Or I don't even want to open that up. So I'm going to keep pushing it down and I will distract myself with being useful and worthy and connected with all these other people and let their struggles and issues structure me.
Yeah. Well, I definitely experienced that as a coach too, similar. I think, there's stuff you have to work through. And I'm really grateful that I figured that out earlier than later and that there were things that I needed to work on and help. I feel like I'm a very different person than I was, 12 years ago. So that is something I think a lot of people do push off because it is hard. It's not something that everybody is taught. I wish they taught this in schools. I think there's maybe a little more discussion around mental health and those types of things, but it's such an opportunity to not wait until you're older to
Mhm.
deal with some of this stuff. So I want to highlight some of the things, and I'm not going to read them all, I promise, but you listed a set of things that says you might be a serial fixer if. So I wanted to read the ones that I think would really resonate with the audience. Place yourself in the role of the fixer or solver in relationships. Have a way of convincing yourself that you're good if everyone around you is. Neglect your own needs and well being often to attend to others' problems. Find it difficult to say no to people who need help, even when you are overwhelmed. Struggle with setting boundaries and often overextend yourself. Derive your sense of self worth from being needed or useful to others. Feel often unappreciated or taken for granted in your relationships. Have a hard time accepting help or support from others. So I'm sure everybody who's listening might resonate with some of those. There's even more in the book, everyone. So that's not the inclusive list. But I thought there are so many things in there that I could see in my clients and in myself, in my family. There's a lot of those things that we don't even recognize that we're doing. So share anything you'd like to around kind of this concept of the serial fixer and how it shows up for people.
Yeah, and just to tee that up, I mean, I think resentment, it's such an icky feeling, and oftentimes when we feel that, it kind of ignites our inner critic, and we are like, "Gosh, we're not good for feeling this." But, resentment is, I think, the biggest sign that we
Mm,
need to really listen to. It's a great data point that our boundaries are not strong enough, that we are not including ourselves in the equation, right? We are
yeah.
fueling imbalanced relationships. And I think, oftentimes we're fueled by guilt. We're fueled also by these really intense associations that generally we make at a very young age based on what was modeled for us or not modeled for us, about like, if I do this, then I'm a good friend. If I do this, then I'm a good parent.
Right.
If I, don't keep going and pushing and am available at all hours of the day, then I don't know if I'm passionate about what I do for a living. Or I don't know if I'm, worthy of this and that and the other. And you can see that sometimes these very rigid associations that normally is pumped out through our inner critics or our inner pleasers, those keep us stagnant. Those keep us from experimenting and playing a little bit with changing things up and maybe integrating new boundaries. You can even see that like the internal conflicts that we face, for example, if you think about maybe last weekend you had this grand plan, you had this part of you rise up that's highly motivated and was like, enough is enough, we're in our 40s, how can we not have this exercise routine down? How are we still eating this? How are we not doing X, Y, and Z? This is crazy. Okay, come Monday, this is our plan. You feel really good about it, you have it all set up, and you go to bed Sunday night, and then Monday morning your alarm goes off earlier so you can start getting all these things in, and another part of you rises. Another party that's motivated by something else and protecting something else might say, it's really early and we didn't sleep well. And we know that when we don't sleep well, we're a little cranky. And if we're cranky, then we're not going to be able to show up the way we want to in our relationship. So, really, is this morning workout going to do much anyway? Maybe we should revisit this whole thing. Let's get our rest. And, it's just really warm and safe in here in this bed. And so you turn off the alarm and you're going to hear later that day from that critic that had this grand plan on Sunday. And that right there, my friends, is an internal conflict. That right there is like, why can I not execute this? And getting in alignment and understanding these different parts of us, our internal bodyguards, if you will, and understanding what they're protecting, what they're motivated by, and how a lot of times they can be in conflict with each other. And that is where we start. That is how we push through kind of those rigid associations, those serial fixer tendencies, and just like things that have been ingrained within us that, are keeping us stagnant or fueling codependencies or imbalances.
Wow, brilliant. I mean, that's a real thing, right? To make yourself get up and work out. What I was thinking about when I was just listing out some of those different examples, self worth, I think, is a piece that also shows up because if I'm helping others, it makes me feel good. It makes me have a purpose, right? It makes me show up to others in the way that I, in my head want to show up. But the piece that I think is hard is when you don't realize that it's maybe an overuse of helping other people, or you're doing it. In my case, I think what I was doing was it was easier if it was I'll use an example. If it was an uncomfortable situation with a lot of people, as an introvert, that was not my favorite thing to be a part of. So I would find a way to help. Oh, let me help in the kitchen. Let me let me go get drinks for people. I could see myself doing it and not even understanding why, later. So I don't know. It's an interesting place, right? Where you have all these like paradigms in our head we're trying to fight with is I have this self-worth thing that I'm trying to work on and I want to help people. It's really interesting space.
Yeah, and that example you brought up was such a common one that I'm sure most of the listeners can relate to. But think about when it is holiday time, and even if you're not hosting and you're at someone's house or your in-laws or wherever, and you start to offer support and help, which is great,
Mhm.
part of being a family team.
Yeah.
But also later, then you feel resentful, and you're like, "See, I just did all these things and I'm not appreciated," or "Gosh, I can't even relax," and I'm like, "This is my vacation too." So then it's like, whoa, 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 like that right there, you have two parts of you in
Mhm.
conflict in real time. And
Mhm.
so it's sometimes even if you find yourself like, wow, I am always 2 steps ahead. I am easily baited. If someone shows like discomfort or even a sigh that I hear from the other room, and I'm immediately problem solving and like, what can I do? Was this about me? Are they mad at me? Is it like you're working way too hard? And sometimes just pausing and asking those questions so that you are not prone to filling in all the gaps. And that's kind of when our emotional intelligence does us dirty, right? But
Mhm.
asking those questions, such as like, how can I be helpful? Or how's it going? Is everything okay? How's your day going? Like, I heard a big sigh from the other room because we immediately start to internalize it. Was it because I didn't do this? Are they mad at me? Is my marriage going to the you know what? Like, it's just we start to make all these narratives with little bits of information, and you can see where that kicks us into fixing.
Yes. So I want to share one more example that I think might resonate for people because it definitely was not something I even realized I was doing. But, when you mentioned earlier about being a good friend or whatever, mine was what's a good mom do? What's a good wife do? And I would try to keep harmony. And so if my husband was upset about something, nothing drastic or anything, right? So when my coach said, Sue, it's not your job to fix him. Like he will solve his own problems. You don't have to solve it for him. And you get to just be in the space with him, or you can leave the space if it's not feeling good for you. And that was so empowering, I have to tell you, because
Yeah.
I didn't realize I was even doing it, but I was doing it
Mhm.
from this place of that's what a good wife does. And it was just really enlightening when I learned that. So,
That's wonderful, and I think so many people are gonna be able to relate to that because that's you going into fixer mode and even
mhm.
prematurely, and then also, I mean, you made such good points about, like, that protective mode, but, like, also it's enabling that whole sequence to continue to happen where you're feeling the emotional brunt of it all, right? And it's not
Yes,
even yours. So
I
that
know.
was a wonderful example.
Well, I now have a different way to deal with it. I deal with it with humor. I'm here,
Yeah,
but I'm
I
not
think
going to
that's
solve it for
wonderful.
you.
Still is coming from a place of, like, empathy and compassion. Like, you're still letting it be known that you're
Yeah.
aware of his shift and you care. And if he needs you to help, like, that's on him too, to ask or direct you and
Mhm.
keeping that ownership with him. And that's going to help him with certain regulation skills, right?
True. Yes, true. Aren't human beings amazing? I'm just telling you.
Fascinating. We are so fascinating.
Fascinating is a great word. Okay. I have the list of serial fixer types. And so I thought maybe we could just do a high level of each of them. So there's the saint first. So I'll let you talk about that one first.
Well, the same, I mean, it kind of sounds like the name, right? It's just you have this very rigid association with and this strong narrative that guides you of this, like, I do not want anyone to not like me. I want to be in the good graces of everyone. I do not want to be negatively categorized. I don't want to touch that anywhere because if I get even a whiff of that, it's going to derail me. And so you can see that like the saint is constantly 2 to 3 steps ahead. It has a very high level of emotional intelligence, can see any or sense any type of shift, and will kind of throw themselves into the fire to preserve and protect others even prematurely. Again, that's wonderful quality, but when it's overused, you can see that that right there is like the number one ingredient in just like gosh, fatigue, overexhaustion, overextension, and then confusion of like, I try so hard and I'm there for everyone and I'm doing good and compromising myself left and right. And I still feel lonely and still feel like I'm not getting the depth of what I need from any relationship. What is happening?
100%. Oh my goodness, that's such a great definition of that one for sure. Doormats is the second one.
Yes. And this, they have similarities, the saint and the doormat, but the doormat, kind of results later in kind of that resentment where, again, you will bend over backwards and you're more prone for people to take advantage of you,
Yeah.
right? It's kind of, if you go back to even if you went to public schools or even any type of school and you did group projects and you were kind of the person that maybe ignited everyone and started delegating and you kind of took that leadership role. Everyone knew right away if they didn't do their part of it, that you would just do all of it because you
Mhm.
were highly motivated and didn't, just they were like, oh, yeah, I'll do section 3. But then, it was due tomorrow and they hadn't done it. The doormat kind of gets left with everything. And they, just kind of again are very prone to being kind of taken advantage of. And it can be very confusing, very hard on kind of the ego, your self worth. But it's just this effort that's being applied, 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 but you're not getting the return.
And the last one is steamrollers.
Yes. And this, I think the best way to sum this up is control disguised as compassion, right? A
Mhm.
lot of times it's, and I think we all sometimes have these qualities, especially as parents, where we want things to be resolved. We want to have like control, or I'll just do it. I'll just email your teacher. I'll just do it, because it's like if we deviate from our timeline, it's going to stress us out more. And so we kind of, sometimes even will say, don't worry about it, or I got it. It's like button that up, resolve that. Don't show that emotion because it's making me uncomfortable too. So it's that control disguised as compassion. And I think steamrollers, you'll find that, if you kind of look at the stereotypical, maybe boss, right? Leader boss that is just constantly not executing good listening skills. They're savvy, they're 3 steps ahead, but they're just steamrolling everyone else's input, idea. They jump into fix. They have this insecurity of like a one-upper, right? And so that's kind of what we see. And oftentimes people that we find that are very controlling or, just operating without very little wiggle room and very rigid, it sometimes is based on that serial fixing tendencies and that insecurity around I don't trust myself to be able to deviate from a plan or have a different way or a different filter with this and trust that people are going to do it. So I'm going to just try to control everything.
So I can see where all of those might show up for people depending on what's
Mhm.
happening.
Mm. Yeah. And it is. I mean, the phrase, and I use it a lot for myself just as a real quick check in of like, Leah, is that control disguised as compassion? Like, are you trying to make this about you or
Mhm.
your timeline? And what are you not trusting? What is
Yeah.
uncomfortable? And that I will say it's uncomfortable, but it's such a good way to check in with yourself and really understand the root of kind of your urgency or your aloofness or whatever it is that's like
Mhm.
driving something, that it's a discomfort within you.
Yeah. It's crazy how all these things keep showing up, and you have to have the awareness. And I love the check-in question. Just asking yourself that question, I think, is enough to maybe disrupt the pattern a little bit too, and which helps people see something different. So you give an example of Carlos in the book and talking about the urgency culture to produce versus slowing down, taking breaks, and that I think just resonated with me because I think everybody, favorite answer is, how are things going? Oh, I'm busy. So busy. Got lots going on. Don't have time to call you. There's
Mhm.
just so much of that I think we default to. So can you talk a little bit about that and how people can start to think about that differently?
Yeah. And one thing I will say that I think is so much harder collectively for all of us today, and has been for some years now, is that if you go back to, I mean, even if we just go to the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of just the way the flow of life, there were a lot of boundaries that were already set for us. We got our news at a certain time through from certain sources. Nobody could contact us on our way home from work. You know, certain boundaries in how we communicated and the roles that we had were kind of set. Like we had moments to recollect ourselves. We had moments of peace. We had moments where we weren't always available and could be contacted, right? And now it's complete, just like everything's interwoven. Our roles, we have to do such a good job, and it's exhausting to even think about. There's so many boundaries that we have to set now that we didn't years ago. And so you add all that on top of just the pace And I think the association that many of us have of just productivity, productivity, that, that equals stress, that equals filling every crack and crevice of our day with doing something productive, consuming something, being stimulated. And if we're not, then we're doing something wrong. And our critic perks up and says, well, if you don't get on that, if you don't do that, you're probably, you're going to lose momentum, or people that you work with aren't going to think you're as passionate or a good team player. And so we have these critical, kind of narratives that keep us in the grind. And the way I like to phrase it is like, we are completely out of shape with just being, with being in the present. And a lot of times I
Mhm.
will coach people on getting repetitions with, there are dozens of transitions throughout your day. Dozens, whether that's walking from one room to the next, whether that's getting your mail, whether that's hopping in the car and going somewhere, whether that's transitioning out of your pajamas into your clothes. Like, there's a lot of things that we do that are transitional throughout the day. And if you just capitalize on maybe a fraction of those and practice presence, and practice refraining from multitasking. I mean, I even caught myself this morning brushing my teeth and walking around the house and gathering laundry. And I'm like, Leah, just stand in front of your mirror and brush your teeth and do a quick check in with yourself.
Oh,
It's
so
like
funny.
these moments that we're constantly filling, which fine, but I think not all of them. Some we don't need our phone as we walk into the kitchen to make sure that we
Yeah.
get that latest news update or we see if anyone texted us in the last 30 seconds. Like, just getting in better shape and getting practice with just being is wonderful micro resets, number one, but it also starts building that self-trust that you can return to that higher gear. You can regain that speed and momentum, because I think a lot of us, those parts of us, don't trust that we can.
Yeah. I mean, I love the way that you framed that because I think I never thought about it as we kind of had all those little places for space built in for our lives. But I was trying to explain, when my kids were younger, even that, if somebody wanted to talk to me after school, they had to come to my house or call me on the phone. And it gave me space away from it. That's, I think, what's challenging for kids today is it's everywhere. It's on their phones. It's people reaching out. It's texting. It's Snapchat. It's whatever, and they really don't get a break, and they can see what everyone else is doing, which creates all this, I'll say, competitiveness, comparison, all the things that
Mhm.
are hard for them to deal with and process, at their ages. We were given a gift that we had that to see what it could look like
Mhm.
and how we really didn't even appreciate it probably at that point. But it was really a gift that helped us kind of reset every day. So I do love the
Mhm.
way you framed that. Let's just talk about presence for a second because I captured this. One of the most fundamental aspects of self care is the ability to be fully present in the moment. And I think that is something that people think of self care in different ways. So I'd love to have you expand on that a little bit and what that could look like for people.
And I mean, kind of like I shared in the beginning, I think self-care is, if you look at it this way, it's generally not post-worthy, right? It's kind of the dirty work. It's the consistent work. It's not necessarily the spas and the, kind of cute outfits you're wearing at the cool gym and all that. I mean, those are still like, those are self-indulgent practices. Those are great. But like, when you're really, I think, connected with yourself, you don't want anyone else to be a part of that necessarily. You don't want that broadcasted. And so I think that, again, it's not really encouraged in our culture oftentimes. But I think, even just capitalizing and having those quick check-ins or those deliberate breaths or even capitalizing on transitions, that could be a great start. And just understanding and those quick, like, how am I doing? Or like, how would I debrief myself after that meeting? Or like, how can I set myself up to maybe sleep better? Like, just those check-in questions that we do so well generally with other people and help
Mhm.
them collect their data, we're not doing for ourselves. And so, I mean, that ability to be present. And, I work with a lot of people that struggle with anxiety. And I think, when I try to kind of share this and encourage just these little micro resets and these moments where they're just with themselves, it spikes anxiety first. Like,
Ah,
it really does, because we don't have that self trust that we can just be with us and not be distracted or engaged with something or something else or our phones. And so I always like tee people up with, you're not going to feel very uncomfortable before you feel comfortable. And think about it as like getting in shape if you're going to start running. If you haven't ran for a decade and you're like, I'm going to train for a marathon or a mini marathon, like, it's going to take some time to build that mind body
Mhm,
connection and that self trust. And you're going to feel incredibly sore and you're going to have all these self doubt. It's going to feel very uncomfortable before it gets comfortable.
mhm.
And that is the same process, I think, with even just being with yourself and the resources that you have and identifying the resources that you want to start to obtain and add to that list.
Love that. I remember I was going through coaching certification. We had to coach with other people, and I was coaching with this girl in Hong Kong, actually. And so it was at night after work. And she made a comment about, "So, what do you do for self care?" And I said, "I don't know what that is." What's the, I have 3 kids under 8, at the time.
Hmm.
And like, I don't understand what that is. And she's like, like stuff you do to take care of you. There's no time to take care of me. Like, I probably get a half hour before I go to bed, that's mine. And it was a real eye opener for me at that moment because I thought, how do I not know this? Like, what has happened? Where have I just focused so much on kids and family and work, way too much work that I didn't even realize how that was showing up for me. I don't know if any other parents out there are feeling that it was an eye opener for me for sure.
It certainly is. And there's
Mhm.
the guilt sometimes when we're like, well, I can't do this for me because I have
Mm-mm.
to do X, Y, and Z. And if I don't do that, then I'm probably not a good mom and I'm being selfish.
Correct. That good mom story, I held on to that for a
Mhm.
really long time. Oh, yeah, I got to a good place though where I would say, "If you need to make brownies for tomorrow, then I will sit here and help you, but you're doing it. Like, you need to learn how to make brownies. I don't have time for
Mhm.
that." Um, so let's talk about boundaries. I know you mentioned a little bit about the bodyguard piece. Can you explain a little bit more about that? Because I do think it would help people understand why boundaries are a bit hard to put in place, first of all, and then to maintain in certain situations where you might feel intimidated or, depending on who's asking you to do something, you might feel like you don't have a choice. So I'd love to just have you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. And I've kind of already alluded, like, think about your inner critic and your inner pleaser. And I kind of talk about your inner rescuer. And those are like the three main body cards I've identified, not even in myself, but just collectively with people that I work with. And they're motivated by different things, right? Our critic wants us to prevent us from feeling things collectively that humans don't like to feel, like embarrassed or incapable or disconnected or failure, all these things, which rightfully so. And they're all motivated by I think protecting us from feeling just things that are not comfortable. And I
Mhm.
think kind of again, I was told I was an athlete growing up and played basketball in college, and I was a mess. Like I was one of those players that I did really well in practice because I was loose, I was present, I had mind body connection. The pressure was in my mind just a lot more. It was lower than in a game. And so if we had a game, the next day, it was almost like I turned into a different person overnight.
Mhm.
And I would be tight. I would be very futuristically thinking in my head, and my critic had the reins. And it was like, what if you don't start? What if you don't remember the plays? What if you miss all your shots? What if you look like an idiot? What if people are watching you even warm up and don't feel like you're worthy of being there? Like, that doesn't set you up to play a very good game, right? And so I was told by a lot of my coaches and people that I highly respected it made sense, but they would just be like, Leah, don't worry about that. Just play. Just have fun. Just smile. Just work harder. And I'm like, why can't I? That's not working for me. It wouldn't work. And I would try the band aid approach and I would try to do all these things and just be like, this is great. I get to play. But the work that I wasn't doing is I hated that part of myself. And I really needed to reframe it as appreciation, that
Mhm.
this part of me, this internal critic, this inner critic was working so hard to protect me from feeling embarrassed, from protecting me from feeling shame and a lack of worthiness. And once I started to realize that I needed to show this part of me appreciation and like, man, girl, you're working way too hard, and to soothe it and align with it and understand it, that was the game changer.
Mhm.
And so these parts of us that are feeding us these rigid associations and keeping us in these roles where we're not including ourselves and jumping in to fix and solve and take false ownership. It's really understanding the internal drivers, the bodyguards, and what they're trying to protect us from. And once we can align and soothe and set these internal boundaries, then we can start to feel confident about experimenting and maintaining the healthy external ones without feeling the guilt and the shame around that.
Yeah. I think once I learned the concept, like, it's trying to protect you and it's trying to keep you safe. Okay. There's something about that situation that is really not great and you haven't admitted it to yourself yet. But
Mhm.
your body knows it, your head knows it, everything else is telling you, don't go, don't go, don't do that. And so that was really, really helpful once I learned that piece for myself at least.
Mhm. That's amazing.
Yeah. Change the game. So
Mhm.
is there anything that you would share with people who are working in toxic environments with toxic bosses, people who are maybe getting gaslit on a regular basis? I
Mhm.
find that that is happening more and more. And I don't know if that's just insecure leaders or leaders who are feeling the pressure and reacting maybe not in the best ways. But I would just love to hear if you have any ideas to help people with that because I think that is happening a lot lately.
I think you're right. And one of the things to think about is especially if you're kind of in serial fixer mode, especially at work, and you are kind of in a situation such as you described, think about too how, you're being baited. You're taking the bait. And what I mean by that is maybe your leader, maybe someone that you work with is sharing a frustration, maybe giving you a one-liner, maybe, just venting about something. You're most likely, because of your emotional intelligence and also to maybe prevent further discomfort or conflict down the road, you're immediately jumping in, taking that little bit of information and creating a whole plan and fixing and solving it, right?
Yeah.
And that right there is fueling codependency. With your leader can just bait, just say things, just sigh and be like, this is not working. And you're off to the races. And so something that you can do is number one, recognize the role that you're placing yourself in that's contributing to this dynamic. You can only control you. And think about, sometimes that just step of paraphrasing. If someone shares something and you paraphrase, so what I'm hearing is this week we need to have this done by Friday, and what would be the steps or what would be most helpful? Or tell me more. Right? Let that person
Hmm.
keep ownership even for another few seconds and do some of the processing work rather than just dump a little bit of information on your plate for you to then fill in all the cracks and crevices.
Hmm.
And so I think that right there can be huge and it takes practice. And I'm sure a bodyguard is rising up now being like, oh my God, that's so scary. And what if it backlashes and I can't do that? But think about you can in a very respectful manner and even teeing it up with, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. I can see that this is important. This is what I heard. What would be most helpful? Or where have you already kind of thought this through? Because I want to learn from where you are and then pick that up. So those questions are collaborative in nature, are validating that person's emotion, even if you don't, you're like, oh God. But that right there is collaboration, but you're also keeping the ownership with them. So they have to give you a directive, a clear directive or more information. Do not take the bait. Do
Hmm.
not operate 2 to 3 steps ahead and take ownership of something prematurely or even at all if it's not yours.
Yeah. I mean, I think that comes back to the slowing down and not reacting immediately. And that
Mhm,
nobody likes space in a conversation. They just want to fill it. And so if you can just say, okay, interesting, let me think about that for a second. I mean, even something just to slow yourself down before you even respond can be just really important because otherwise they're happy to let you fix whatever, right? I think that's also
mhm,
easier for them to put it on your back and have you solve it for them and go take care of
mhm.
it. Great. But I don't know that it's your job to do that for them. So, yeah,
Yeah,
I love that. I think I hope everybody can hear that and see that that's an opportunity to practice, use some of those questions that Leah just shared and see if you
mhm,
can try to redirect a little bit. Is there
yeah.
anything I didn't ask you about from the book or anything else that you share that you work on that you would love to share with the group?
I think too, just to even emphasize what we were just talking about is that phrase. I mean, I use it a lot, as a clinician, but I use it a lot just in general to slow me down and also to, kind of keep ownership with its rightful owner and empower others and give them kind of the repetitions and processing skills that they need, whether it's with my children or my, spouse or whether it's clients. But the phrase like, just tell me more. Tell me more. I mean, that right there, it slows you down. It helps you continue to approach from a place of curiosity. It slows down that tendency to fix and be like, well, what if you did this? Well, what about this? Well, let me just go, and off to the races. But sometimes, as we know, and we all pretty much know this phenomenon, that sometimes it is so helpful for people just to be able to share, right? And they're not always after a
Hmm.
solution. And you know as well as I do, like people do
Yeah.
not execute and follow through with something if they don't have their own flavor. If they have not, you can give them the best advice under the sun and they might look at you and be like, that sounds like a great plan. And then you meet with them next week and they haven't done anything
Right.
because they didn't have their flavor to it. And so
Uh-huh.
that phrase, tell me more, or that, wow, no, that does sound like a lot. Like that keeps the ownership with them and lets you kind of be that supporter rather than that solver.
Yeah, brilliant. I love it. All right. Well, we're going to transition into the 4 questions that I ask every guest. So I'm excited to hear your answers. The first question is, what do you think visibility is and why do you feel that way?
Oh, gosh, that's such a good question. I think visibility, and I know I'm going to maybe take an abstract road to it, but I think visibility is taking risks. And what I
Mm.
mean by that is like, maybe I'm just speaking from my own experience, but I don't necessarily love to be very visible, but I think that the thing that I do love is connection. And
Mm.
so I've had to push and break through some fears and associations I've had with being visible or taking risks with putting myself out there because ultimately feeling connected, feeling, kind of the pleasure and kind of the appreciation of certain opportunities trumps the discomfort of like
Mhm.
being visible. So I think for
Yeah.
me, I've learned that visibility is putting yourself out there and, kind of showing you yourself and the universe like, hey, I'm open to whatever. I'm
Yeah.
open to connection. I'm open to experiences. So I'm going to put myself out there and kind of you do the rest. I mean, that's kind of how I've operated with visibility.
What are you doing to be visible?
Gosh. Things that are not comfortable for me. Like, I think social media is a big one, which I'm like, oh, but that's just I'm going with it. I think, visibility with speaking, visibility with doing things such as this that is so much fun and I think it just fuels connection. But I really am. I'm trying as best I can to be visible and create space for space creators. And that comes in a lot of different forms.
Yes, so important. What is the best leadership or career advice you've ever received?
I mean, I'm gonna quote kind of an athlete phrase, but something that I've heard and I say, but it's like you miss 100% of the shots you don't take,
Mm.
right? And I think that one, from my basketball days, but even just now, that keeps me like, you got to try because regardless if you try, you may miss, but you're going to miss regardless if you don't even put yourself out there.
Yeah, so true. And last question is, what is a book you would recommend?
It's an oldie but a goodie, but I think The Alchemist. I think it's just a
It's a
great
great
a
book.
great book. And I need to revisit it. Like it's been years since I've read it, but I think it's just one of those books that it just really, I think, helps you reframe things, helps gratitude, helps just it's just a wonderful read. So I think
Yeah.
that's a good one.
Love that book too. I totally agree. And if anyone would like to reach out to you or connect with you or learn more about you, where would you like them to go?
You can if you go to just leahmarone.com, you can find me there. You can subscribe to Fixer Files. You can find information about me, my book, things I'm doing and speaking. But yeah, I'd love to connect. Or you can find me on LinkedIn if you kind of go that route. So I'm kind of all over the map. So pick your poison.
Excellent. Well, I loved our conversation today. What you're doing is so helpful and I'm so glad you wrote this book. I told you before we got on the recording that I just feel like it's such an important thing for people to know and I wish I would have had it, many years ago and we'll definitely be sharing it with so many people that I know in my world. So, thank you for writing it and thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. This has been
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today on the Visibility Factor podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one.